What's up everyone, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if Naruto was neglected and his eyes started transforming in the middle of the Chunin exams? If you enjoy, then please like, share and do comments. For when Shikamaru would marry, he hoped that his wife would be perfectly average. Average looks, average intelligence, average personality. Anything else would simply be too troublesome to deal with. Shikamaru always knew he would marry eventually. Not because he trusted in his charm or his looks, and certainly not because he was a romantic at heart. The answer was a more logical, a more boring one. It was written with black ink on white paper. Actually, he'd never seen it, but he knew that the Sandame's and his father's signatures were written under the text that stated that he, Shikamaru Nara, would marry a certain girl. He was never told his fiancée's name. Shikamaru always knew it would happen since his parents had never kept it secret from him. In some ways, he thought, it was a much better option than suddenly being told by the time he was 17. If it had been that way, he probably would have had dreams and expectations for his future which would have been crushed by the sudden revelation that his life had been planned all along. This way, however, Shikamaru always knew what to expect and accepted his future marriage like the fact that he was going to die. It was what it was, and there was no way to stop what would happen from happening. Therefore, there was no use in spending energy brooding over it when he didn't have the power to change the outcome anyway. He was 6 when he was, as usual, lounging with Choji on the roof of the Akamichi estate, him watching the clouds, the other boy eating a bag of chips. Shikamaru had always gotten along with Choji. They knew each other for as long as he could remember since their fathers were very close friends and visited each other frequently. Choji was uncomplicated, nice and, unlike many other kids their age, calm and not too troublesome. From their current resting place they could spot 2 figures turning around the street corner. Even though they weren't in close distance, it was easy to recognize them as Ino and her father Inoichi by their platinum blonde hair that was fairly rare around Konoha. Shikamaru groaned. Inoichi probably had something to do and his wife was busy, as well, so he brought Ino to the Akamichis to be taken care of. It wasn't unusual for their parents to entrust their children to each other. Great. Get ready for her to talk your ear off. Another groan. Choji grinned. Shikamaru knew that the boy didn't mind Ino as much. He always believed her heart to be at the right place. It didn't change the fact that she was annoying though. As the 2 figures came closer, Ino's nagging voice became gradually louder. She sounded like she was complaining about something, again. Knowing her, she was probably whining about having to spend time with them. After all, she didn't like their company any more than Shikamaru liked hers. They simply weren't compatible, at all. He closed his eyes, enjoying the vanishing silence while it lasted. I can't believe I have to spend my time with you guys, again. Rumors saying Sasuke will be at the playground, but here I am, stuck with you too. Another point on his wish list for his future wife. Please do not have an obnoxiously high voice. He'd somehow started to keep track of things like that. Whenever he'd experience annoying behavior, he couldn't help but think about his future wife possibly having the same traits. Still, he didn't actually want to set any expectations for his fiancée. He didn't want to be disappointed when she'd turn out to be anything but what he could tolerate. And him tolerating her was the best case scenario. He didn't want to think about the more likely one. Isn't Sasuke going to start academy this year, too? Choji asked and scrunched his empty bag of chips into a ball. Great, encourage her even further. Ino started a long speech that they both droned out. By the end of it Choji sighed wistfully. I wonder whether Ruka's joining, too. Ruka was the friendly confectioner's daughter whose family had a shop near the Akamichi estate. Probably not, her parents are civilians, Shikamaru mused. If I hadn't been born into the clan I wouldn't be planning on becoming a shinobi either. Shikamaru kept his features neutral. Unlikely, he retorted. You mean because of your fiancé? Choji blurted out. Shikamaru whipped his head around, his gaze pinning his friend down with fierce anger. The other boy threw his hands over his mouth, as if that would take back the words he had spoken. Oh god, I'm sorry. Choji stammered. Shikamaru relaxed and let his features slide into their usual nonchalant state. No point in getting upset now. Not only did it require energy, but it also wouldn't change what had already happened. He knew that Choji slipped that piece of information on accident. What? A high-pitched voice screeched. He had almost forgotten about Ino's presence. You're engaged? He suppressed his urge to groan. Great, he shrugged. It only caused Ino to become even more agitated. What does that mean? Are you engaged, or aren't you? He averted her eyes. Yeah, I am engaged, he admitted quietly while being painfully aware of how awkward that sounded coming from the mouth of a 6-year-old boy. What? With whom? Since when? She questioned excitedly. Shikamaru sighed. Damn, at least he didn't have to, couldn't actually tell that. No idea. Since I was a baby. If possible, her eyes seemed to enlarge even further. What do you mean no idea? She's from another village, okay? I don't know her. She was quiet then, trying to process what she'd just found out. But why? Shikamaru shrugged. The next time he was at the park, not to play with the other hyperactive kids, but to escape his mother and lie on the grass while watching the sky, was probably 1 week after. He immediately noticed the other children and their parents gazing at him carefully. They, or at least the parents, tried to be subtle about it, but he could sense their eyes on him. Then, someone finally seemed to gather enough courage to speak up. Shikamaru idly acknowledged that he was an Inuzuka. What was his name? Kiba, he remembered. Hey Nara, is it true you've got a girlfriend? It was so blunt, it was almost funny. Kinda, he answered. No point in hiding it now, obviously everyone knew, already. Konoha was a big village, but it was a village nonetheless. Most people knew each other. I told you to keep your mouth shut, Ino. Great. The buzz died down quickly. But in the few weeks it lasted, Shikamaru became trashy gossip material for the whole town. When the whole ordeal came out, everyone was baffled. He didn't believe that all reactions were completely honest. At the very least, the clan heads, the council and other political leaders in the village must have known of the arrangement. After all, his fiancée came from another village. To assume that his father would organize something like this without giving those people a heads up was a little naive. Sure, they were currently at peace, but that didn't mean that anyone trusted each other on any level. Each village had spies in other villages and everyone knew it. It is more than possible that the girl he had to marry was being raised to send information on Konoha to her hometown. After all, she had no reason to be loyal to Konoha. On the contrary, she was probably livid at having her life planned ahead by a couple of strangers. That would mean that the higher-ups in Konoha consider her important enough to risk this probable threat. Everything pointed to this being a result of political scheming. But that wasn't why the villagers were so surprised when they heard of Shikamaru's engagement. Arranged marriages were archaic, something that belonged to the past. Only very traditionalist and conservative clans still organized them if they were strictly necessary. Now the Naras were known as a rather laid-back family. It could only mean that this marriage somehow played a role when considering the bigger picture being village affairs. In no way concerned this matter only the families involved. The only explanation that Shikamaru could think of was that, for some reason, Konoha wanted to get this girl to come and stay in Konoha. Marrying her off to the clan heir whose family wasn't only influential but also deeply loyal to the village was a perfect way of assuring that. Interesting. Shikamaru was intrigued, already. He was 12 years old when he finally graduated from academy. However, he knew that his graduation didn't mean that he had become an actual genin, yet. After all, it didn't take a genius to recognize that most of the students who had supposedly graduated returned to the academy some days later and stayed there till the next graduation exams. That was why he waited until he was assigned to a team and met his new teacher. When they had finally passed Asuma-sensei's test, too, he decided to make his move. When he entered the compound he saw his father sitting on the timber floorboard of their terrace playing shogi with himself. Shikamaru walked over and sat down cross-legged at the other side of the board. After contemplating for some time, he finally moved the stone on his side of the board and met his father's eyes. Shikamaru had always respected him, not only because of his intelligence that the man was renowned for, but also because of the decisions he made as the head of their clan and as a father. It must be hard, holding all of these positions and titles. Shikaku, however, had always kept a level head and made smart moves. Shikamaru was thankful that his father had never pressured him by reminding him of his duties as the future clan head. The man had not even spoken to him about Shikamaru holding back at the academy and keeping his grades intentionally low, although the young Nara knew that his father knew what game his son was playing. In return, Shikamaru had tried to be a good son. Sure, he was lazy and nonchalant, But he knew that his father didn't care whether people thought he was dumb as long as he wasn't. The Naras weren't a flashy family. No dramatic backstory, no keke genkes. The only trait that each member of their family possessed was their cleverness. But it was good the way it was. He'd rather not be known in the whole country for his abilities. The less his enemies knew about him, the better. He didn't want to gloat, he wanted to survive. He knew that his father felt the same way. As long as his son was actually able to defend himself in a fight, Shikaku didn't care whether his son put up an act and pretended to be a good-for-nothing slacker. Shikamaru knew that he was living up to his father's standards. Not once had he whined, rebelled or acted childishly and accepted even the arranged marriage without protest. Never had he been a particularly difficult child to handle. Today he wanted to reap some fruits of the seeds of his endurance. So, Shikaku finally broke the long silence. I passed. Subtle pride shone in his father's features as he smiled gently. Asuma? His father finally made his move on the shogi board. Time has passed quickly, the man noted in a rarely melancholic tone. Shikamaru nodded. I'm 12 already. Only 5 more years. His father's head shot up, his face mirroring the surprise he felt. It was the first time for Shikamaru to actively bring that topic up. His father was still gazing at him, silently asking what his son's intentions were. Finally, Shikamaru moved his own player on the board and looked up to meet his father's gaze. I think I deserve to know. Shikaku sighed, as if having hoped to evade this conversation. You know that it's a secret, and even if I wanted to tell you all about it, I'm not allowed to. I won't speak to anyone about it, Shikamaru countered. I don't know, son. His father sighed again. It didn't take long for the news of your engagement to spread around town, and I was the target of questioning glances for quite some time. There, that word was out. Engagement. Shikamaru hated it. I couldn't control your best friend's son blurting it out, only so that your other best friend's daughter could spread the news, although I told her to keep it secret. His father cocked a brow, visibly holding himself back from commenting on how much of a smartass his son was being. Another sigh, another move on the shogi board. I cannot tell you everything, not even much. But that what I can tell you, you mustn't tell anyone, not even your mother. I trust you, Shikamaru. The younger Nara nodded, feeling responsibility laying itself on his shoulders. I promise. After contemplating for some time, Shikamaru moved another stone. Why? He had to know. Why did someone even arrange a marriage? What was the reason behind all of this? His father carefully gazed at the board, seemingly thinking about his next move. But Shikamaru knew that the older man thought about how to word his answer so that he'd avoid lying while not giving too much information away. Finally, he took a breath and spoke up. Her parents were from Konoha. They used to be very important and strong shinobi. Interesting. So the girl he always thought to be a foreigner actually had her roots in Konoha? However, the night the Kyuubi attacked, they passed away. After that, there was a big discussion as to what should happen to their daughter. She had become an orphan and she didn't have any other relatives in Konoha. He immediately sensed that something was off. Why was there a big discussion as to what should happen to a random orphan? Many children had lost their parents that day. His fiancée was only one of many. What made her special? We knew she had distant relatives in Uzu and the Sandaime believed that it would be the best for her to grow up with them. However, the council was against sending her away. They wanted for her to become a Konoha shinobi. His father sighed again, as if only thinking about those discussions exhausted him. So we compromised. The council would agree on sending her away, if she was going to return and become a Konoha citizen. Shikamaru understood. So marrying her to a Konoha citizen is only a means to tie her to the village? His father nodded. Yes, that was how the idea of the marriage came up. As the council wanted her to become a kunoichi, they wanted her future husband to be of a ninja clan. For the happiness of both husband and wife, the Sandaime wanted the boy to be around the same age as the girl. So at least she was his age. He saved the additional piece of information for later evaluation. With these criteria, the number of candidates had shrunk to a handful. Understandably though, everyone was reluctant about arranging the future of their children. The Inuzukas, for example, backed out immediately. Then the Hokage came to me in private and asked for you to carry the burden of this messy situation. And I relented. It made sense. The Naras were an influential clan and deeply loyal to Konoha and the Hokage. They constantly made decisions that were beneficial for many people and not solely for them. Considering the prerequisites, he was the best choice for this affair. He couldn't see his peers taking an arranged marriage as good as he was. But there was one question that wouldn't leave his mind. Why did the council want to tie her to the village? His father had mentioned that her parents were talented shinobi, not that that meant anything. Although genetics played a role, they didn't determine anything after all. Just because her parents were good shinobi, didn't mean that she would become one, as well. Unless, she had something like a Kekkei Genkei. If that was the case, if her Kekkei Genkei, or whatever made her desirable as a ninja, was some extinct trait, it would make sense for the council to try and get her into the village. But if she was that important, then why even go through all the trouble of sending her away? Shikamaru knew that politics didn't care about a single girl's happiness when her misery served the benefit of Konoha. He knew that his father wouldn't answer these questions, though. The information Shikamaru had received had been worded deliberately vague. His suspicions were confirmed. That's all I can let you know. Even what I've just told you is a secret that I shouldn't have talked about. Shikamaru looked him in the eyes. What he was going to ask his father was a needless question, one that didn't hold any meaning. There was no use in knowing the answer, yet he couldn't help but wanting to know, anyway. What's her name? Shikaku frowned slightly, his voice became reluctant. Shikamaru. At the very least, I'd like to know the first name of the girl who's going to be my wife in less than 5 years. His voice was unusually bitter, his words harsh. He felt a little bad about guilt-tripping his father in order to gain information. Obviously the man hadn't agreed to this whole arrangement lightheartedly. But hey, no one even asked about his opinion and he'll be the one getting married. Shikaku sighed. Naruto. Suddenly the whole situation seemed too real. Before, his future wife had just been an unknown person, a vague concept, his wedding ages away. But only the presence of a name suddenly gave the anonymous girl an identity and made him realize with full force, I am going to marry Naruto in less than 5 years. He kept silent for a while after that, gazed at the shogi board, but didn't really see anything. Shikamaru, help me with the bags. His mother was standing in front of the gates, 2 big shopping bags in each of her hands. He looked at the board again and then at his father. I guess we'll finish that another time. Come on, Shikamaru. Run. Said boy wasn't near the group that consisted of 3 people, but he could probably hear the loud voice of Ino Yamanaka clear enough. Asuma grinned. He liked his team and he knew that each of them would become a formidable ninja one day, although only one of them got to participate in the final battles of the Chunin exams. That was why the teacher was determined to train his student. Currently Shikamaru was only warming up by running laps, but even that seemed to exhaust him. When he finally closed distance to the group of 3, he was panting loud enough for them to hear. Shikamaru, you have to work on your speed and stamina. Your strategically gifted mind gives you a great advantage at battles, but it will only bring you so far, Asuma chided. The boy rolled his eyes. If it was up to me, I would stay at Genin and Weed Gardens till the end of my days. So troublesome? Tiredly he collapsed on the field of grass. Ino accusingly pointed her finger at him. Hey, you aren't even done yet. Don't you dare lose that battle. You have to win for our team. The Nara, not seeming to get more motivated by that comment, sighed in an irritated manner. Think of it this way, Choji argued, if you win now, you don't have to participate at the next Chunin exams, at least. If you lose, you have to go through all the stages of the exam again. Shikamaru raised his eyebrows. That actually makes sense. Groaning, he stood up and half-heartedly began to run again. Asuma snorted. Great. We motivate him by promising him to laze around later. He knew that his student had the capacity to become a strong shinobi. Just looking at how far he had come without even trying was proof of that. Ino rolled her eyes. I really feel sorry for the poor girl that has to marry him. He'll probably be the kind of husband who never does any chores, leaving his wife to do all the work. She sighed. Choji smiled. I think if he loved her, he'd gladly help and wash the dishes or something. Asuma began to laugh. Yeah, right. He knew that kids grew up and matured, but he simply couldn't imagine Shikamaru being lovey-dovey with anyone. Neither could he picture a girl being that way with Shikamaru. Briefly he wondered what type of women the boy would even be interested in. Beauty or strength didn't impress him, and it was rare that someone could keep up with his intelligence. Either he found women to be boring or he thought they were too troublesome. I have to agree with Ino on that, Choji. Shikamaru doing chores voluntarily? Sooner he'll stay a bachelor forever. Ino whipped her head fast enough around for her ponytail to bop up and down. What? Asuma relented. Nah, you're right. Even if he didn't want to, he'd probably get pressured into getting married. He's the only clan heir, after all. Although the Naras aren't too uptight, they wouldn't want their clan to die out just because Shikamaru was too lazy to go on a date. He laughed, trying to disperse the tension on Ino's face. Choji chose that awkward moment to speak up. Sensei, could it be that you don't know? Asuma became even more confused. Know what? Finally the girl seemed to recover from her nonplussed state of mind. Know what? Know about Shikamaru's engagement, of course. At first, Asuma didn't quite register what Ino had said. He had to roll the words through his mind a couple of times for them to sink in. Engagement. Unconsciously he opened his mouth in bewilderment and let his cigarette fall on the ground. Choji nodded sympathetically. You really didn't know. What engagement? Since when? With whom? The boy resumed on eating his chips while rolling his eyes. Wow, sensei, you really have to catch up with village gossip once in a while. This is old news. Before the man could answer, Ino butted in. The other villages are probably more aware on what's going on in Konoha than you are, sensei. How didn't you know? Asuma grinned apologetically. You haven't answered my questions though. The girl sighed as if having told that piece of information many times already. She is the gossip queen of Konoha, after all. He's been engaged ever since he was really small, an infant only. But Shikamaru's never met her, at least that's what he says. Apparently, all he knows is that his fiancée lives in another village. Asuma was silent upon hearing that, his mind busy with pondering questions. He watched Shikamaru tiredly run his laps. Who would have thought that the Naras had agreed on arranging a marriage? If he had expected anything like that, it would have been from a strictly traditionalistic clan like the Hyugas. What was the reason behind all of this? And why did the fiancé come from another village? He briefly entertained the thought of asking Ino, but it was obvious that she didn't know much, or else he would have heard all about it by now. His musings were interrupted when Shikamaru finally arrived and exhaustedly collapsed on the grass for a second time that day. He closed his eyes and panted loud enough for them to hear. Shikamaru, quit lazing around. Ino yelled passionately. Let him have a short break, the teacher interrupted, and do some stretching. I want you to spar with him after that. After that day's training session had finally ended, Asuma had invited his team to a barbecue once again. Although Shikamaru told them that he'd rather go home and rest, the teacher had argued that he'd need nutrition, especially proteins, for his muscles to develop. Thereon the boy had relented and had accompanied them to the restaurant. After they had finished eating dinner, they were ready to return to their homes. As usual, they kept on walking through the streets together until Ino was the first one to go her own ways when they approached the Yamanaka estate. Then Choji returned home. At the end, only Shikamaru and Asuma were walking down the familiar road. The sun had almost completely vanished, the sky was only slightly illuminated. When they arrived at the crossroads where the teacher would normally take a turn to a different street, he kept on walking by his student's side in the direction of the Nara estate instead. If Shikamaru was confused by that, he didn't let it show. The boy lifted his head to watch the stars emerge behind a layer of clouds. What is it, Asuma-sensei? Shikamaru's eyes didn't stray from the night sky. You've been like that ever since I finished running laps. Overthinking and letting me train more on my own than you usually would. Asuma should have learned by now to stop getting surprised by Shikamaru's awareness. But not even he had noticed that he wasn't acting the way he normally would. I'm surprised that you only found out now. I had gradually developed the notion that everyone in Konoha knew. Asuma raised an eyebrow, continuing to play dumb. What do you mean? His student rolled his eyes in exasperation. As if you don't know. The engagement, of course. The sensei grinned guiltily. What was it that revealed me? That look of pity mixed with curiosity. Shikamaru finally turned to meet his eyes. I have seen it more times than I care to remember. It wasn't a mistake on your part, I just have a lot of experience. Asuma's grin slowly faded from his face. How are you dealing with it? Shikamaru knitted his brows. You're the first one to ask that. He shrugged. My parents and I, don't usually speak about it. Like we all silently agreed on ignoring the elephant in the room. The teacher felt sympathy for the boy. But his original question had been unanswered. And, how do you deal with it? The Nara sighed. Usually I don't. I try not to think about it. Feeling that the boy wasn't finished yet, Asuma remained silent. But lately it's been on my mind. Especially at the beginning of the Chunin exams. He chuckled. It was a bitter sound. I was so paranoid that she might be under the participants. He let out a tired sigh. She's not even here and she's already managed to rile me up. Asuma was careful to keep his face neutral. It was rare of Shikamaru to speak about his feelings this openly. Evidently the whole ordeal must have been pretty stressful on him. That's what women do. You shouldn't be too hard on yourself though. Anyone would react the same. No, they'd be hysterical, if they were in your shoes. The boy didn't seem convinced. It hasn't always been this way. Before, I was always able to shut it out, but nowadays, he gulped and took a deep breath. After a moment of silence he spoke up again. I always have to think of how much time there's left until the marriage. Asuma felt sorry for his student. No matter how mature Shikamaru was, it was obvious that the burdens of his future were lying heavily on him. He felt a stab of guilt at having thought that the boy led a relatively easy life. An influential family, his position as the clan heir, his easygoing father and fact that he had hit the genetic lottery on the intelligence department. All of this didn't equilibrate the responsibility that he had to take at such a young age. I simply feel as if I'm not ready to get married. And I can't see myself at a different place 5 years from now. So the wedding was going to take place when he was only 17 years old. They both halted in their tracks when they noticed that they had arrived at the Nara estate. Asuma turned around to look Shikamaru in the eyes and placed a hand on his student's shoulder. I won't tell you to relax or stop taking it too serious, Shikamaru. It's not my place to do so. What you're carrying is a burden and that's why it is completely fine to be frustrated at times. But you shouldn't allow your worries to take over your life. The boy's smile was faint. You should rest. I'll meet you tomorrow at the same training ground at 1 p.m. Be glad I'm letting you sleep in, he teased lightheartedly. Thanks sensei. After that talk with Asuma sensei, Shikamaru tried to see things in a more relaxed way. It was funny that he, of all people, had to be told to be more easygoing. In retrospect, he couldn't believe how he'd allowed himself to get so riled up. It had been out of character. So for some time he tried to forget about it. After all, he still had a battle with the troublesome Suna girl to fight. But as if life hadn't been difficult enough until then, some idiots actually went and decided to attack Konoha. So when he stood in front of 8 auto nins, playing bait and trying to stall them, knowing full well that there was no way he could beat them with his depleted chakra reserves, he suddenly remembered again. Then he became irritated about having spent so much time worrying over this stupid marriage that wasn't even going to happen. Even now during the last minutes of his life he thought about it. Although he told himself to let it go, to avoid spending even more time on this crap, he couldn't help himself. That marriage had been an idiotic concept to begin with, the plan completely faulted. It had always been very likely that he'd die before even turning 17. His heritage had not only determined his wife, but also his job. Before he'd even been born it had been clear that he was going to become a shinobi, which wasn't an exactly safe profession. Shikamaru asked himself whether the responsible people had ever thought of a backup plan in case this would happen. Whether one of the other ninjas his age would be forced into marrying Naruto or if they'll decide to blow this whole thing off after all. His thoughts were interrupted by the sounds of someone jumping down the tree standing behind him. He believed he was going to get killed when he saw that it was Asuma sensei who had been hiding between the leaves. The man defeated the enemy effortlessly. His teacher was amazing, beating a group of foreign ninjas up without breaking a sweat. But because he was too tired to care he resolved to exhaustedly collapsing to the ground. I guess that wedding still stands Naruto. Although his state of engagement hadn't changed that day, many other things in Konoha did. The Hokage was killed by his own student, a man who had been a nuke nin for some time. Although the case cage had died as well, Shikamaru couldn't bring up any sympathy towards the citizens of the wind. But Konoha had to move on. Soon Tsunade, another one of Sandame's students, hopefully one that wasn't quite as psychopathic as some others, became the Godem. Shikamaru attended too many funerals and helped to repair the damage that had been inflicted to buildings and infrastructure. When they had finally begun to hope that they could recover, Sasuke Uchiha, the boy from Team 7, betrayed Konoha by leaving the village in order to gain power that Orochimaru, the very man who had attacked their home, had been promising him. It wasn't like Shikamaru had ever cared all that much about him, on the contrary, he disliked the Uchiha ever since their academy days. But it was discouraging to experience a fellow Konoha shinobi, someone who was supposed to be a comrade, turn his back on them. But Shikamaru dealt with it and moved on. He learned not to dwell. Every day could be his last. It was a month after his 16th birthday when the Hokage called him to her office. When Shikamaru stepped into the room, he noticed that Tsunade was alone. No Shizune, no council, not even the Anbu was present. He knew that they wouldn't be talking about mission assignments. He suppressed the urge to gulp anxiously when her cold eyes pierced into his. For some odd reason she liked to make others nervous. "Shikamaru," she greeted, "you know that there are documents in this village that only a limited number of people have access to, the Hokage being one of them." Confused, he nodded. What was the purpose of that statement? Do you know what happens to those documents after the Hokage dies? Not understanding her point, he believed her question to be rhetorical at first. But after a moment of silence he realized that Tsunade was actually expecting an answer and cleared his throat to respond. "I suppose the successor gains access to this material." The woman nodded approvingly. "That's right. It took me some time to work myself through these endless amounts of insensate crap, but I found something that you may find interesting." Shikamaru knitted his brows. He could think of only one topic that had fit into this bizarre situation. "You're alluding to the engagement." After all this time it was catching up with him again. The Godem nodded. Then she pulled out a brown, weathered folder that had been lying underneath a staple of paper. "You want to see them?" Whether he wanted to see them? He was pretty sure that there wouldn't be much of any use in there. Shikamaru was stuck in an unwanted engagement and no amount of information would change that. But in the end his curiosity got the best out of him. Wordlessly he approached her desk and accepted the folder. In it there was a sheet of paper. The edges had slightly yellowed in the past 16 years but were undamaged otherwise. He began to read through the long text, finished it and read it again. At the bottom end there stood his father's and the Sandame's signature, just like he imagined it all those years ago. Weird how you could decide over another human being's future by the flick of your pen. Ultimately this document traded people. It was just another time he wondered whether their villages were as civilized as they prided themselves to be. Although he reread the whole thing again, he didn't gain much new information from the text since it had been worded in a pretty vague way. There was just one thing. Uzumaki. It was her last name. Naruto Uzumaki. He repeated it a few times in his head, trying to picture the person with this unusual name. Soon he became irritated. Like it mattered what her full name was. She was going to be Naruto Nara in a year anyway. He tried to feel resentment against Naruto Uzumaki because he couldn't express any towards the Sandame or his father. They were the real target of his anger. But he was known for understanding when a fight was lost. There'd be no point in rebelling because he didn't have the power to prevent the set future. But when he read through the text, those mere words that had doomed his life forever, he couldn't prevent the bitterness from arising inside of him. Appalled, but with a straight look on his face, he laid the folder back on Tsunade's desk. She was staring at him with a rarely seen sympathetic look in her eyes. "You're probably trying to ignore that part of your future, but it's a hard-edged truth that it's going to happen in less than a year." Her voice was soft, yet firm. "I want to suggest something to you. Think about this on your own and don't let yourself be influenced by other people. Considering the situation, you have every right to be selfish." Shikamaru remained silent and waited for her to continue. "We could ask Naruto Uzumaki to come to Konoha sooner than originally planned." He didn't understand. Why would Tsunade think that he'd marry this foreign girl any earlier than he had to? If it was up to him, he'd enjoy every minute of freedom until it was torn away from him. However, his face must have mirrored his confusion. "Not in order to marry. Just for you to get used to each other. I know I'm not offering much, but it's everything I have. Maybe it'd be easier on both of you if you get acquainted to each other instead of jumping into marriage life headfirst." Shikamaru nodded stiffly. His mind was blank. "Can I visit you at the end of the week to give you my answer?" 5 days had passed and he still wasn't any closer to making a decision. His intuitive reaction to the Hokage's proposal was no. Hell, no. Shikamaru wanted to put, not only the marriage, but everything that concerned Naruto Uzumaki off for as long as possible. However, he begrudgingly admitted that Tsunade had a point. If he stalled the whole matter, his fiancée would eventually appear on their wedding day. He'd have to live in the same house with her, share a room and even sleep in the same bed. Her, a stranger. Shikamaru shuddered. Of course, it would still be awkward if she came to Konoha earlier than that. But at least they'd have some time to get to know each other so that the transition to marriage would be a little smoother. Shikamaru groaned. God damn it. Logically, the latter option was the right one, but his gut was rebelling at the notion of having to meet Naruto in such a short time. But Inara always went with the smart decision. With an air of finality he realized that although he wanted to rebel with every fiber of his body, his brain had already decided. Still he waited until the end of the week to tell Tsunade about his decision. When the day arrived, he felt absolutely miserable. In answer to the Hokage's questioning glance he spoke while trying to avoid her eyes, knowing the vast outcome of these words. I'd like to take you up on your offer. She nodded. I'll get in contact with Naruto Uzumaki. Of course, she has to agree on this, too. I'll let you know as soon as I get an answer. While Shikamaru was making his way to return home from the Hokage Tower, he couldn't help but hope for Naruto to decline Tsunade's offer. Just because he'd made the strategically best decision didn't mean that he was happy with it. When he arrived at their estate, he forewent entering the house in favor of climbing straight on the roof. He needed to think. Shikamaru didn't notice how time flew by and was surprised when he heard his mother yelling his name at the top of her lungs to call him down for dinner. Reluctantly, he stood up from where he'd been lying and watching the cloudy sky, to return the dining room. He'd decided not to tell his parents or anyone else about Tsunade's offer and the decision that he had made. After all, his fiancée could still decline and there'd be no use in informing anyone if this whole thing was going to be blasted off. The sound of knocking on the door interrupted his thoughts. Are you expecting anyone? His mother asked into the round. When both he and his father shook their heads she stood up and left the room, leaving Shikamaru with Shikaku's heavy gaze resting on him. Is there something troubling you, son? Shikamaru avoided the man's eyes. He knew that he was behaving suspiciously but he feared that Shikaku's piercing stare would tear every single secret out of him. So he tried to evade the question. What makes you think that? He was sure that his father knew what game he was playing but maybe he'd managed to stall long enough for his mother to return. You're even more pensive than usual, the older Nara supplied. Shikamaru didn't comment on the man's words. He'd rather not lie to his father but he also wanted to keep his thought to himself. Shikaku sighed. Alright, but don't forget that I'm here if you need anything. That was what made the son finally look up, grateful that they were dropping the subject. Thank you. I know. It took 3 days for the Hokage to finally call him to her office again. 3 agonizing days he was constantly lost in his thoughts, paranoid about Tsunade sending for him any moment. When an eagle circled around him in the sky and signaled that the Hokage was calling for him, he finally relaxed the muscles he'd been constricting. Finally he'd receive an answer, something that would change the current situation. An eternity seemed to have passed in his eyes although a 3 days wait was actually very little time. After all, the message had to arrive at Uzu and then an answer had to be sent back to Konoha. It could only mean that his fiancée hadn't thought about Tsunade's offer for too long. Unlike him, she hadn't spent a week rolling the idea through his head, looking at it from all sides and weighing the pros and cons for a countless amount of times. So more of a gut instinct type of person? Great. Their first incompatibility. Maybe he'd find out more when he arrived at the Hokage Tower. Luckily, he wasn't required to wait and could enter Tsunade's office right away. When he opened her door, she looked up from the documents she'd been reading. Ah, Shikamaru. Sit down. Her voice was soft and he could almost taste the pity it was laced with. He was experienced in detecting it all too good. Regardless, he closed the door behind him and sat down at the other end of the desk. I have received an answer. She paused and kept on staring at him for a short while which annoyed him to no end. This was not the time for being dramatic. Finally she resumed. Naruto agrees to our offer. She asks when it would be the most convenient for you and your family. Shikamaru exhaled. It was done. The decision had been made. I'll ask my parents tonight. Can I come to inform you tomorrow? She nodded. I'll be expecting you. He stood up. He needed to get away from here and spend some time with himself and think this all through. Just as he attempted to leave, Tsunade spoke up again. "Wait, there's something I have for you." She began to search through her desk drawer. After a short while she pulled out an envelope and offered it to him. Questioningly, he raised one thin eyebrow. "It's from Naruto. She wants you to have it." Confused, he stared at the offending piece of paper. For him? Why would she write him, and what the hell would she have to say to him? He shoved these questions aside and decided to deal with them later. He felt overwhelmed with the news he'd received, and all he wanted was some peace. He took the envelope. Although it seemingly consisted of regular paper, it felt scratchy in his hands. Shikamaru knew that it were his hyperware nerve endings that were playing a trick on him. "Oh, I almost forgot," Tsunade muttered. She went through her drawer again and pulled out a square, little piece of paper. "There you go." Feeling curious, he grasped it and stared at the strange ink patterns that he failed to decipher. "It's a seal. You have to press it onto the letter and seep a little chakra into it. That's the only way to open the envelope. If you tried it with violence, it'd destroy itself." She grinned. "The seal is only compatible with Naruto's and your chakra. No one else can activate it." He nodded stoically, ignoring the questions that were swirling inside his head. When he exited the tower, he was careful to walk slowly. He didn't want to catch anyone's attention. He didn't want to walk into anyone he knew, he didn't to talk. The only thing he could focus on was the envelope that he'd hidden under his vest. With every step he took, he could feel it brushing against the thin fabric of his sweater. When he finally returned home, he checked whether his parents had arrived. Only some of his other relatives were strolling outside the estate. When he finally reached his room and released a breath he didn't know he was holding. Quickly he went to the shelf and pressed the letter and the seal between two books. It wasn't a good hiding place, but he'd return to it in a little while. Shikamaru just needed a little time. He'd walked into the forest, just deep enough so he wouldn't meet anyone. Now he was lying on a thick branch of an old tree with a free view to the sky. His mind was full of problems waiting to be analyzed and dissected. He sighed. First things first, he decided to deal with these questions step by step. So the first problem at hand was Naruto agreeing on coming to Konoha. His feelings towards that hadn't swayed, and he'd still been trying to avoid their first meeting for as long as possible. But he knew that this was the best solution for everyone involved. Yet he couldn't help to feel nothing but dread when he realized that the die has been cast now. It was certain that his fiancée would come to Konoha even earlier than actually planned. Ignorance of her decision had plagued but also comforted him. It had given him room for hope. But now he'd have to talk with his parents about the whole matter, which he couldn't even delay any further since he'd told Tsunade that he'd inform her when Naruto should best arrive. It was a conversation he desperately wanted to avoid, but there was no helping it. Tonight, he'd speak to his parents about the Hokage's offer, his decision, Naruto's answer, and finally, her request. So the first problem had been dealt with. Moving on to the next. That letter. Confusion was a vast understatement of his feelings towards it. Shikamaru wondered why she'd even bother sending a letter. It wasn't like they had anything to say to each other, because they didn't know each other at all. He frowned. That led to the question what the content could probably entail. Obviously, he could simply open the envelope and read that damn thing. But until now it seemed like learning anything about this girl only resulted in more problems. Shikamaru groaned. "Who are you, Naruto Uzumaki?" After he realized how much time had passed in the woods, he made his way to return home, just in time not to miss dinner. "Well, hello stranger, didn't think we'd be seeing you today," his mother greeted sarcastically. Yoshino Nara valued family dinners, even more so since Shikamaru was being assigned with a rising number of missions in the last years. She meant well. Shikamaru couldn't decide whether he should be annoyed with her aggressive attitude or be relieved about being able to put that conversation off just a little further. Shikaku chuckled and watched his son fondly. "Isn't it the end result that counts? He is here. The rest shouldn't matter. I've lost track of time," Shikamaru answered truthfully. "And the Hokages called for me," he added on an afterthought. "Better be over and done with it." He sat on the chair facing his father and took the plate that his mother offered him. He'd never be able to finish the food that was stacked on it. His frayed nerves had killed every sense of appetite he might have had otherwise. "What for? Another mission assignment? Your last one wasn't that long ago," she remarked. Shikamaru played with his food by pushing it from one side of the plate to the other until he gave up and looked his mother in the eyes. The Godem wanted to talk about an offer she made to me less than 2 weeks ago. His parents inquired him with curious looks. Well, what was it about? Yoshino asked. Assuming it isn't confidential, Shikaku added, always the politician. Shikamaru took deep breath. She offered inviting Naruto over earlier than planned. Taking their silence as an indication to elaborate, he continued. I accepted it. He shifted his eyes to look at his father. Then she asked Naruto and she agreed too. Tsunade wants to know which date would fit you both the best. For several seconds nothing was said. Unsurprisingly, Yoshino was the first one to speak up. I guess we should decorate one of the guest rooms first. The wall color has faded and since she's gonna stay for a while we should freshen that up. Take care of that. I'll look into some matching curtains and a rug. Probably should take about 3 weeks with how lazy you are. Shikaku? Shikamaru could sympathize with his father's dumbfounded expression, although they should have learnt by now to expect this. Because that was what Yoshino Nara always did. She didn't overthink or analyze like her husband or son, she simply reacted. 3 weeks should be fine, his father agreed when he finally gathered his senses. Shikamaru nodded in understanding. Can I leave? I'm not hungry. With a deep sigh Shikamaru leaned against the white porcelain and let his body relax in the hot water that filled the broad bathtub. He was at ease knowing that no one would bother him in the bathroom. That was the reason why he had picked this place for gathering the courage to read Naruto's letter. With still dry fingers, he reached for the envelope and the seal that he had lain on the ground before filling the tub. Following Tsunade's instructions, he pressed the little piece of paper on the envelope and seeped some of his chakra into it. Suddenly, the places that once had been glued together separated themselves. A spark of excitement shot through him. He paused. Excitement? That was ridiculous. He wasn't a kid getting his first love note. Well, he hadn't gotten a love note before and this girl was his fiancée, but still. After taking a deep breath he let his fingers travel into the envelope and take out a neon orange sheet of paper. He stirred. Who the hell would use that kind of material? Years later, he wouldn't dare to admit that his hands were slightly shaking when he unfolded the sheet and began to read silently. Hey Shikamaru, I know what you're thinking now. Orange? Really? Why? It's the best color ever, that's why. That is, if this letter ever reaches you. I don't know whether Tsunade will want to give it to you. But in case someone tried to open it, and I know they will try, call it female intuition if you want to, I placed a seal on it. Reading other people's post is creepy, but not rare. So I wanted to be extra cautious. Anyway, I'm looking forward to coming to Konoha. I'd love to get out of Uzu more often. Did you know I was from here? I'm wondering how much information you have on me since I don't have a lot on you. They made a huge fuss over keeping everything about you a huge secret. But I've gone off track again. I was saying that I'd like to see Konoha and I'm excited to meet you and your people. I'm not just saying that, I really am. I don't know, I just hope that you're not a prick. As for myself, I guess I'm alright. So weird, right? That we know almost nothing about each other. Anyway, that was the reason I wrote this. I thought if I had already established some sort of contact with you, you'd know what to expect. Because one thing that they did tell me about you was that you're pretty smart. Does this letter tell you anything about me, Shikamaru? Are you intelligent enough to deduct something about your fiancé through a mere couple lines? But there's also another reason for sending you this. Since I'm the one coming to Konohagakure I thought it'd be appropriate to bring souvenirs with me. But knowing myself I'll probably forget the gifts at home. So I thought, why not send it now? Have you noticed the patterns on the inside of the envelope? Shikamaru put the letter aside in order to grab the envelope. He had noticed a smear of ink at the inner corner before but he had ignored it because the orange paper had been all he'd been able to focus on. With his curiosity piqued, he turned the envelope inside out to inspect the dried stain closely. On first glance, it was only that, an accidental bead of ink. But on close inspection he could spot patterns that twirled into each other, seemingly coincidental swirls having a purpose. A seal, he deduced. Even with having little to no knowledge on seals Shikamaru was able to notice that the patterns were familiar. It could only mean that this was a more common seal, or else he wouldn't recognize anything. Going over the possibilities, he deducted that this was most probably a storage seal. He picked the letter up again. It's a storage seal, as I'm sure you've noticed. Seep some chakra into it if you haven't already. He did like he was told and focused some chakra into the small seal. Suddenly an orange, scrunched up piece of paper popped out of the inky patterns. Rolling the ball between 2 fingers, he noticed that there was something inside that the paper was wrapping up. When he unwrinkled it a little, green gem-like stone appeared. It was beautiful. Although the edges were uneven and bulky, the faint white swirls against the dark green gave it an oddly elegant look. String was drawn through the self-made hole on the upper part of the stone. A necklace. Shikamaru grasped the letter again. It's pretty, isn't it? I found the gem while I was traveling with my sensei near the mountains. He said it's a moss agate. I don't think that it's particularly expensive, but it's supposed to enhance chakra levels and healing abilities. Now I don't really believe in that sort of thing, but even if it worked, I don't think I need it. Maybe you'll find it more useful? At the very least it's nice to look at. Anyway, we'll see each other in some time. I'll expect Tsunade to inform me. Till then, goodbye. Naruto Uzumaki. Shikamaru stared at the green gem and groaned. Whatever he had expected this letter to be, this wasn't it. It was as if some outside forces had handpicked Naruto to become his future wife just to throw him off balance. After taking a deep breath, he started to analyze. Her writing style was jovial and sloppy, comfortable as if she'd known Shikamaru for years. What was even stranger was the content. I'd like to see Konoha and I'm excited to meet you and your people. Was she lying? Trying to lull him into false comfort to win his trust and get information on Konoha? It was a valid concern because her writings were nothing if not suspicious. Nobody would look forward to come to the village that had doomed your future. He didn't trust Naruto Uzumaki. So he picked up the letter and reread the whole thing again. One particular passage stuck out to him. Does this letter tell you anything about me, Shikamaru? Are you intelligent enough to deduct something about your fiancé through a mere couple lines? It was almost a taunt, Shikamaru realized. She was teasing him. For the umpteenth time in his life, but with much more fervor than ever before, he asked himself who the hell his fiancé actually was. His head started to hurt when he faced the biggest enigma at hand, the necklace. Why did she send it? Could it be that? Carefully he laid the stone aside. Shikamaru doubted that she'd dare to do it. Still, it wasn't completely amiss to consider that she might have laced her gift with some sort of substance. Writing like a happy-to-go, friendly girl only to get him to activate the seal and infect him with some sort of toxic material. Confusedly, he attempted to analyze the letter again. The one thing that stood in stark contrast to the rest of the contents of the envelope was the handwriting. More like calligraphy really. It wasn't sloppy and confusing like her words, but it wasn't girly or pretty either. No unnecessary swirls or attempts to make it look cute. No, it was simply incredibly neat. Shikamaru groaned and let his body sink even deeper into the warm water. Everything about Naruto Uzumaki was a big puzzle. An interesting puzzle, a voice in his head supplied. He brushed it aside. Tomorrow he'd go to the Hokage and let her know that his fiancé could arrive in 3 weeks from now. Then he'd find Shizune and let the stone be inspected by her to make sure that it wasn't laced with any substances that didn't belong in there. Shikamaru closed his eyes. That was everything he could take. He was tired. The next day at breakfast his mother asked him and his father with which color they should paint the guest room with. Every girl likes pink, so why not go with pink? His father answered nonchalantly. It was obvious that he couldn't care less which color they chose, but he wouldn't dare to say that to his wife. What if she isn't a girly girl? Shikamaru countered. He didn't really know why he even bothered arguing, but that's what Yoshino made the Nara men do. Discuss over pointless matters. He could feel that his father was close to rolling his eyes. Then go with green. It's neutral. Tomboy or princess, it fits everyone. Shikamaru stood up and carried his dishes to the sink. I had to go inform the Hokage. I was supposed to meet her today. He headed towards the door but halted at the threshold. In an afterthought he added, take orange. His mother raised her eyebrows as she stared at him suspiciously. Why orange? Shikamaru shrugged and escaped. After speaking to Tsunade, he was assigned a B-rank mission right afterwards. It wouldn't start till 5 hours though. That's why he decided to use that time to search for Shizune before packing his supplies and meeting up with his teammates. When he finally found her while she was going through some documents in the hospital, he asked her to run some test on the gem. She took the offered stone and stared at it with curiosity. Can I ask what for? I just want to make sure that there's nothing that doesn't belong in there, he answered evasively. The doubt in her expression was clear for him to see. No shit, but you know that the services of the laboratories are not open to public. Shikamaru wanted to groan. Why did she have to be difficult? It's for the well-being of Konoha. He knew he was laying it on thick, but luckily it convinced her nonetheless. Shizune sighed and put the necklace into a little plastic bag that had been lying nearby. You'll have to wait though. It'll be ready in a week. Satisfied, Shikamaru thanked her and returned home to pack. But his mother wasn't very happy about his sudden departure. But what about the paint? Shikamaru didn't know why it was so important how the dam wall was painted, but he didn't want to start a fight over it. Besides having no time, those fights always ended up with his mom as the victor. There was no use in fighting if you were going to lose anyway. Buy it, and the rest, I'll deal with it when I'm back, he answered swiftly and made his way to meet up with his team. They were traveling for 3 days when he finally decided to ask his teacher something that he had been wondering about for some time. Asuma-sensei? Choji and Ino turned around to listen to what he was saying when Asuma grunted questioningly to encourage him to go on. These vendors who are selling all these gems which are supposed to affect your health positively and enhance your chakra levels. Those things aren't valid, are they? Shikamaru. Ino screeched, I can't believe that you're getting lazy enough for you to consider something that dumb instead of getting your ass up and work out. But Shikamaru didn't pay her any attention and resorted to staring at his sensei who seemed to be lost in his thoughts. Well, Asuma began, more often than not, the stones that vendors are selling at souvenir shops won't be affecting anything since they're faked. But supposedly there are some gems that have just the right amount of certain minerals to have a positive effect on the human body. But that effect is only minimal. I can't imagine that you'd really feel a valid change even if you were in the possession of a real gem. Shikamaru nodded. He had been thinking about the moss agate, the letter, the seals and Naruto in general for a while now. That girl had already managed to turn his life into a nerve-wracking mess, and he doubted that her actual presence would bring any clarity. Actually, he couldn't remember the last time he just leaned back and relaxed. For some time, even before Tsunade's offer, he'd been tense with the knowledge of his approaching marriage. That's why he expected Naruto's arrival with dread and anticipation. Dread, because he feared that his life would become even more difficult than it currently was. Anticipation, because he hoped that her presence would finally solve all these puzzles that were occupying him. But that wasn't the only reason. Although Shikamaru wanted to deny it, there was another thing that made him feel excited over his fiancée's arrival. She had not reacted the way he had expected her to. She was interesting and he was intrigued. That girl already had him on the hook just because she was so damn good at surprising him. Who are you, Naruto Uzumaki? He couldn't count how many times he had asked that question. Not that he was sure whether he truly wanted to know an answer. His fiancée had become a walking enigma by going against everything that she should be doing. Just when Shikamaru finally thought that he'd caught up with her, she effortlessly pulled a move to catch him completely off guard. He sighed and muttered, troublesome, before jumping towards the next branch. 18 days until her arrival, he reminded himself. Shikamaru returned from the mission only to discover that his home had been turned upside down while he was away. His relatives had all fled, probably to escape the wrath of the Nara matriarch who was currently furiously scrubbing the windows of the main house. When she spotted her son, her eyes lightened up. Ah, Shikamaru, finally. Go take care of that paint. Without a comment, he entered the house where his father had been apparently bullied to scrub the kitchen counters. Shikamaru raised a brow, a wry grin on his face. Isn't that a little bit over the top? The house already had been cleaned before. His father's face fell. Your mother wants everything to be completely perfect for when she arrives. Shikamaru groaned. He could understand that Yoshino was probably nervous, but making such a fuss over the state of a completely fine house was troublesome. That's why he lazily took a shower, changed his clothes, and finally escaped through the roof. No way in hell he would spend energy by helping to clean an already clean house. The days passed faster than he expected them to. Meanwhile, his mother eventually managed to capture him and forced him to paint the godforsaken walls. Surprisingly, his parents really had bought orange paint, although it was fortunately not the obnoxious neon orange that Naruto used in her letter but rather a soothing pastel tone. Somewhere along, his mom had bought new curtains, bed linen and furniture in general, which Shikamaru found completely unnecessary. When you're married you can bring them to your own house, was his mother's argument, and he shut up afterwards, as he really didn't want to talk about that topic any further than absolutely needed. Furthermore, he met Shizune to gain the results of the tests that had been run on Naruto's moss agate. No dangerous substances, just a regular moss agate, had been her answer. She looked slightly annoyed as she had probably caught up to the fact that he was laying thick when he was claiming that examining the gem had been for the well-being of Konoha in the first place. Shikamaru hoped that it wouldn't come to bite him in the ass when he needed her the next time. Currently, he was lying with Choji on the Akamichi roof. "You aren't going to ask anything about it?" he inquired. Choji merely grinned. "The last time we talked about it, things went havoc." The look on his face was amused. Shikamaru remembered all those years ago, when he'd been sitting on the very same spot with his best friend and Ino had visited them not long after. It only lasted a day till the whole village knew about his engagement. Everybody already knows about her arrival anyway. It was true. This time, he tried to be even more secretive about his fiancée, but his mother was the one who didn't even bother keeping it to herself. Shikamaru knew that they were a hot gossip topic. "Yes," Choji supplied, "everybody is talking about the future Nara matriarch. It will quiet down though." The Nara scrunched his eyebrows up. "I doubt that." His friend looked surprised. "Why do you think so?" "That girl," he paused, pondering how to word it, "doesn't seem like someone that you stop talking about. She stands out from the rest of the crowd." "How do you know that?" He shrugged. Fortunately, Choji wasn't one to interrogate someone even if he got curious, as he had a healthy amount of respect for other people's privacy. If it wasn't that way, Shikamaru hadn't bothered telling him about his fiancée. "You know her name is Naruto?" "Really? Strange." "Yeah, Naruto Uzumaki." He wondered whether the people gossiping about her knew her name. "She sent me this." He seized into his pants pocket, pulling the green gem necklace out and stretching it out towards Choji. His friend grasped and inspected it with sparkling eyes while a smile was stretching out on his face. "It's pretty." Shikamaru shrugged. The Akamichi heir turned to look him in the eyes. "You should wear it." The Nara raised a brow but Choji didn't relent. "I think it's a nice gesture, the least you can do is wearing it." He gave the necklace back to Shikamaru again, who shrugged and put the gift back in his pants pocket. "I might." In order to pick Naruto up on the day she would arrive, Shikamaru made some plans. Firstly, he traded doing some house chores for his mother's promise to keep the date of his fiancée's arrival a secret. Then, through some well-placed, subtle comments he gave Ino the impression that Naruto would appear a week later in Konoha than she actually would. That way, no one would bother him the day she would really come. He decided that it was the best decision to pick Naruto up at the gates by himself. To send someone else would be rude, and seeing as he's having to get along with her for the rest of his life, they should probably have a good start. Most definitely he didn't want to have his family with him while doing that, as he could practically envision them, his father subtly, his mother not so, gawking at her and watching their interaction, which would make everything much more uncomfortable. When the morning of her arrival had come, his mother was still buzzing around trying to perfect every last detail at the house. Shikamaru refrained from groaning when she found something that wasn't up to her standards again. "Flowers. We forgot to put fresh flowers in the vase in her room." "Shikamaru, quick, go to the Yamanaka shop and buy some." He wasn't in the mood to do anything since he'd already slept poorly the night before. It was extremely rare for him to not being able to rest, but it had been the day before his fiancée's arrival, which would make anyone nervous. "Why me?" he asked, not really wanting to know the answer, just looking for a way to stall. "Well," his mother looked at him conspiratorially, "you obviously know more about her than I do. Looking at how you were aware of her favorite color and all. So you should know her favorite flowers, too, right?" He sighed. His mother would never let that die down. He should have simply kept his mouth shut and let them paint the room pink or green or whatever. Although he really couldn't be bothered with going out now, he wanted to listen to Yoshino's lecture even less. So he went to the Yamanaka shop, where luckily Inoichi instead of his daughter was standing at the counter. Shikamaru greeted him and looked at the flowers. There were so many colors and shapes that it was starting to strain his eyes. "Whom are the flowers for?" the Yamanaka head asked. Suddenly he wished Ino would have taken his place. After all, at least she wouldn't notice when she was lied to, if you were good enough. However, this man was impossible to deceive. A girl. Shikamaru knew that Inoichi knew who he was talking about. The man hasn't been living under a rock, after all. The older man started at him pensively. "Do you know the colors she likes?" Shikamaru shrugged. "Orange." The bouquet shouldn't be orange though. He didn't care about decoration, but he was almost sure his mom would get a heart attack if he showed up with orange flowers for an orange room. Can you describe her to me? Character traits? Shikamaru could have rolled his eyes. He didn't even got to see the girl, for God's sake. So he had to make assumptions through the information he did have. After all, he didn't read that letter 100 times for nothing, and he had always been good in analyzing others. I suppose, energetic, impulsive, optimistic and friendly. He stopped himself from saying intriguing. That wasn't a character trait. He put his hands in his pants pocket and played with the green gem in it. And he searched for the word that would describe what he thought of Naruto when he read those lines in the letter that stood out the most. Does this letter tell you anything about me, Shikamaru? Are you intelligent enough to deduct something about your future wife through some lines? Foxy, you can bet your sweet ass I am. Fortunately, Inoichi didn't interrogate him any further and started putting together a bouquet. Shikamaru didn't quite understand what system he was following, but at the end he could spot many daffodils and an occasional baby's breath and some red flowers which he didn't know the name of. Even though he knew next to nothing of arranging flowers, he recognized that the bouquet gave off happy vibes, the heavy yellow color making it seem like a ball of sunshine. The Yamanaka sure knew what he was doing. It was 5 p.m. and Shikamaru had been waiting at the gates for half an hour, since the Hokage had assured him that Naruto would appear around that time. He'd been pondering how much contact Tsunade and his fiancée actually had that made the Godem always know where the girl was. He repressed a groan and played with the moss agate in his pants pocket, rubbing the even surface and tracing the imperfect edges. It helped him think. Turning his head from the clouds, he gazed into the deep forest, waiting for Kiba, Hinata, Shino, or Kurenai-sensei to emerge. Tsunade had informed him that they were the ones with the mission to accompany Naruto. Then he picked up noise. Laughter and chattering that became louder and louder and made Shikamaru's heartbeat quicker from excitement. He didn't scold himself for it. Not only because he was maybe going to meet the woman who he is going to spend the rest of his life with, which was a more than legitimate reason to be nervous, but also because he was too focused on the sounds. He rubbed the gem in his pocket feverishly. Shikamaru could hear them, loud voices. One was Kiba's and the other. The green stone was flipping fluently through his fingers. The other he didn't recognize. I'm telling you, Hinata-chan. You have to visit me. If not, I'll come myself. You are my new best friend after all. The voice wasn't particularly high or girly, it was oddly scratchy. What? I thought we were best friends, Naruto-chan. Kiba, he recognized. She is my best girlfriend, Kiba. Also, I don't see you being near as cute as Hinata-chan is. Shikamaru wished they would already come out or go away altogether. He feared the gem in his fist would crack. Then, he could spot the first ones emerging through thick woods. Kurenai-sensei first, and behind her Kiba and Naruto. Shikamaru immediately knew that it was her, even if another person would have come claiming to be her. He knew it was that girl right behind Kiba and next to Hinata that was Naruto. He never put any real effort in envisioning her before. Why should he? She wouldn't end up looking the way he'd imagined anyway. But seeing her, it was clear that this had to be her. The blonde hair that reminded him of the daffodils that now stood in her new room and gleaming blue eyes were the first features he noticed. They were almost a mirror of how he'd described her character to Inoichi. Energetic, impulsive, optimistic, friendly. She was finally near enough for him to see a bright grin on her face. Foxy. Heya Shikamaru, what are you waiting for? It was Kiba who was talking, but the Nara couldn't tear his eyes of the blonde girl behind him. Said girl's grin morphed into a toothy smile that threatened to split her face into two. Shikamaru. She called in that loud, scratchy voice of hers, her tone cheery, as if she had met a good friend after a longer time. It was then when Shikamaru remembered certain lines of her letter that didn't seem important when he first read it but now made him realize what they really meant. I thought, if I had already established some sort of contact with you, you'd at least know what to expect. Yes, it almost felt like he knew Naruto a little. Their first encounter had already been made through that letter, and it irked him that she had thought of possibilities beyond him by writing it in the first place. Shikamaru wouldn't even entertain the ideas that she had gone through. He steadily looked into her cobalt blue eyes. He couldn't help himself. He smiled, only a little and faint in comparison to hers, but it was there. Although he'd thought he knew how he would react when he was faced with Naruto, Reality was the complete opposite, because Naruto herself had reacted in a way he hadn't calculated. She was a riddle that he still hadn't solved. As if she was challenging him. The games are on, Naruto. Huh, Naruto-chan? You know the Nara? I thought it was your first time coming to Konoha. Kiba interrupted his train of thought. Luckily, Kurenai butted in before Shikamaru and Naruto were forced to elaborate on the whole matter. Let's go guys. We have to report to Hokage-sama. She ignored her former student's indignant spluttering and nodded to Shikamaru once, acknowledging him. Apparently she had more information on her mission than her Chunins. Then she turned to Naruto, smiling friendly at her. We'll see you in the village. Naruto's own smile didn't falter. You bet we are. Especially you and me, Hinata-chan. We will see each other much more often. The Hyuga girl's features were shy but genuinely happy, and after nodding once, she followed her teammates in the direction of the Hokage tower. So, the blonde girl turned to look at him. It's only the two of us now? He beckoned his head, a rare grin on his face. Let's go. Just you wait, Naruto Uzumaki. There isn't a puzzle I haven't been able to crack. And I was like, Grammy, calm down, I don't need escort or anything like that. Does she think I'm a wuss? Naruto's hands were raised, gesturing wildly. But then she wrote me that I could forget ever getting out of Uzu if not some of her own ninjas were supervising me. So, having no choice, I waited for them. I was a bit angry I guess, but then I saw Hinata-chan, and you can't possibly be mean to her, can you? Her face, which was conveying anger only seconds ago, morphed into expressions of empathy and adornment. She was someone that reacted instinctively. Not thinking too long about what she was going to say, she simply voiced it straightforwardly. That was what irked Shikamaru about her. Watching her face, he noticed that she simply displayed her emotions for everyone to see. Naruto didn't try to be mysterious or broody. So how could she be so interesting when she didn't even try to be a riddle in the first place? Tired from pondering too much, he leaned his head back and watched the ceiling. Currently, his parents and Naruto were sitting on the sofas in the living room where a simple, "How was your journey?" wasn't answered by a quick, "Fine," but rather with a long, adventure-filled tale. Shikamaru turned to watch his mother. Yoshino and Naruto were the ones leading the conversation, as they were the more talkative people in the room. His mother looked like she had cracked the jackpot. Shikamaru knew that she was incredibly relieved about how Naruto turned out to be, as she had been fretting over that topic since some time now. Although Yoshino emphasized that the only thing she prayed for, concerning her daughter-in-law, was her hopefully not being a lazy ass like certain other individuals, it was obvious that she was glad about how Naruto presented herself. Till now, she seemed friendly, honest, active, and funny, which only helped to put her into his parents' good books. Not that Naruto was planning that. Her straightforwardness shouldn't allow her to try to act differently in order to make others like her. Naruto-chan. His mother called in an unusually sweet tone. You must be exhausted from your trip. Why don't you let me show you your room so that you can get a shower while I make the last preparations for food? The girl's eyes went huge in the prospect of food, as she stood up to follow Yoshino in the direction of her new room, their voices getting lower as they retreated but still loud enough for the men to hear. Sighing, he sagged further into his seat as he felt his muscles unwind and relax. He was relieved. This first meeting hadn't been as awkward as he thought it would be because Naruto unknowingly didn't allow it to go into that direction. She was uncomplicated in a way that made her easy to be around with, but complicated in a whole another way that kept Shikamaru interested. He turned to look at his father, whose facial features seemed to mirror the relief Shikamaru was experiencing. In the middle of this tricky situation, the young Nara hadn't been attentive enough to notice his parents worrying about it, as well. Wow, this looks great. How did you know that orange is my favorite color, or is this coincidental? He grew alert as he listened to Naruto's loud voice. Oh, it was Shikamaru's idea. He even painted the room himself. Really? How did he? Please don't talk about, it must be because of that letter I sent. Shikamaru suppressed the urge to groan and kept a stoic facade. He could literally feel his father's smug look fixating him from where he was sitting. His parents were never going to let this die down because, letter from your fiancé, sounded simply too close to, love letter, which it hadn't been. And he painted it himself? That's really sweet. Shikamaru played with the gem in his pocket, trying to overcome his uneasiness. He couldn't think of the last time his actions had been referred to as sweet. Yes, my son tends to be like that, very committed. His father snorted and tried to smother his laughter. Shikamaru rolled his eyes. He couldn't remember the last time he had been called committed, either. Probably never. Oh, you even bothered with flowers. They are so pretty. Shikamaru will be happy to hear that you like them. He insisted on buying them personally. Okay, this was simply getting ridiculous. His mother was almost acting like she was trying to set them up, which was pointless, considering they were already, engaged. Really? That's so thoughtful. Naruto sounded amazed. Yes, he is quite the gentleman. It was then, when his father couldn't hold his laughter anymore. Shikamaru tuned him and the female voices out. When Naruto emerged from the shower, his mother had set the table. Shikamaru couldn't help analyzing every single one of her actions. They were going to live together after all. Might as well get to know something about his future wife. Her absence had only lasted for about half an hour. Considering that her hair was very long, reaching her waist, it should take longer to wash. Still, she didn't take long in the bathroom and probably didn't fret over what to wear, or else more time would have passed. Presumably, she didn't give much thought to how she appeared like someone like Ino would. The rest of her appearance only confirmed that. No makeup, no jewelry, and no unnecessary complicated clothing. Instead, she seemed like a more practically oriented person. When she had arrived, the clothes she wore weren't aiming to set a fashion statement but rather to travel and, if necessary, fight efficiently. Even now the dress she changed into was simple, loose, comfortable, but Shikamaru could acknowledge that, pretty. The only fact that didn't quite fit into the equation was the long hair, which was now flowing down her back. It wasn't practical, got in the way in a fight, and was generally more troublesome to handle and care for. His mother seemed to be focused on it, too. Naruto-chan, your hair looks so beautiful. Was it always this long? They had sat at the dinner table. Naruto smiled. Nah, it was really short when I was little, not even reached my shoulders because I thought it was too annoying to handle. But then, Shikamaru hoped that whatever persuaded her to grow the hair out was vanity. That was what others would do. A boy saying her that long hair was pretty, the hairdresser claiming that the look suit her, something like that. I went traveling and kind of forgot to let it cut. After some time my sensei told me that I resembled my mother more with longer hair. She shrugged, apparently slightly embarrassed. Since then I keep it long, although it's hard to handle. Of course, it had to such an explanation. He refrained from groaning. Why couldn't Naruto Uzumaki be predictable once? His mother, however, looked like she discovered a halo on top of Naruto's head. The next day he woke up to laughter. Blearily he lied in his bed and listened to the chattering of his mom's and another girl's voice. Her voice was scratchy, he noticed, and then remembered Naruto. Enjoying the peaceful, sunny morning, he drifted in and out of sleep until he woke up by a gentle hand on his arm. It wasn't hasty like his mother's or big like his father's hand. Shikamaru opened his eyes only to be met with blue. Come on, sleepyhead. I'm going to the village with or without you, but if I get lost it will be your fault. She laughed, sent him a last look and exited the room. Weird, to interact with her in such an intimate atmosphere. He distantly remembered promising her to show her around the village yesterday. Tiredly, he stretched himself and changed into his usual attire in order to go into the dining area. Yoshino and Naruto were still talking lively, which made Shikamaru question where they pulled out all these topics of conversation. However, maybe his mother will be in a better mood more often from now on, which would make his life much easier. Or she would at least start sending Naruto to wake him up on a regular basis. A gentle hand was surely more appreciated than his mom's shouting. When he arrived, he noticed that his father was missing. He was called to an early council meeting. His mother commented on his questioning. After they had breakfast together, with freshly pressed Naruto Uzumaki orange juice, as the blonde girl insisted on repeating, they cleaned up. It was one of the rare times he got away with moving deliberately slow in order to tidy up as little as possible, since his mother's hawk eyes were focused on her future daughter-in-law who was telling some story again. Come on, Shikamaru. She grabbed his shoulder, the wide smile ever present on her face. Show me Konoha. He sighed. Everything? She laughed. And more. He turned to his mother. We'll be returning late. Then he went about playing guide in the center of Konoha. Fortunately, Naruto adapted to his lazy stride as they walked through the main street. He scratched his head. You should have taken my mom with you. She could have shown you better around than I. Naruto grinned knowingly. Don't try to sell yourself short. You're making a good job. Shikamaru raised a brow. Really? She nodded, a serene look on her face. How couldn't you? It's your home. For the tour, Shikamaru guessed that it was the best idea to first show the girl the most important place of the village. That's the Hokage Tower. You'll mostly need to go there when the Hokage asks for you or you simply want to get assigned for a mission. After the mission you go report there and receive your paycheck. Naruto stared openly at it. It reminded Shikamaru of a question he was planning to ask. Do you know Hokage-sama? She always seemed to be informed of what you're currently doing. She turned her look from the tower to him. I've only met her personally once. I don't know how she's now, but when Sensei and I encountered her she was a goner. Gambling all of her money when she wasn't drinking it. She shrugged. And then she went and became Hokage. Shikamaru grinned. Yeah, embarrassing life story. Really? She looked pensive, and then, as if determining something. I don't think so. It makes you believe that no matter how much of a bum you are, you can become big. He couldn't help but laugh silently. Don't let her hear that you called her a bum. After the Hokage Tower, Shikamaru quickly calculated how to show Naruto the village in a way that would exert him as little as possible. As soon as he made a plan, he first took her to the marketplace, then the shopping district, and even, on Naruto's insistence, to Red Light District. It felt awkward to go to that place at stark, sunny daylight, but the blonde girl seemed impressed. Why so interested? She huffed. In Uzu there is nothing. Then she rolled her eyes. Not even a red light district. He chuckled. That's Uzu's loss. He went into the other direction. Do you want to see the training grounds? In response she turned around quickly that her blue dress swayed in the wind. Are you kidding? Of course I want to. He started walking with the blonde girl following close to him. As soon as they entered the main street where more people were walking, he noticed the villagers turning around to look at them when they thought he wasn't watching. Sometimes they didn't even try to be subtle and just blatantly stared at them. It had been like that all day. Obviously, the reason for that could only be the Uzumaki walking next to him. Shikamaru didn't suspect that the villagers really knew who she was yet, although it shouldn't be hard to deduct. Soon enough word would get out. He turned to look at Naruto, who either didn't notice the people's stares, masked her feelings well, or was so used to the looks that she didn't spare a thought on it. Shikamaru believed it to be the last, since he could imagine her being stared at most of the time. When he had told Choji that he believed that Naruto stood out from the crowd, he had referred to her behaviorisms. But he had come to realize that not only her personality but also her looks made her stand out like a sore thumb. Not only did she have blonde hair, blue eyes and tan skin, which was rare to find in Konoha, but also her hair was blonder, her eyes bluer, her tan more bronzy than anyone he had seen here before. She was more intense in every aspect of her appearance. Those are the training grounds? He was pulled from his thoughts only to realize that they had already arrived at their destination. He nodded. That's number 1, but there are over 50 in total. Her eyes widened. Are they all that big? He shrugged. Or bigger. They mainly differ in their environment. Some are rocky, others are surrounded by a sea and others are in the middle of the woods. That way you can not only practice with different material but also train for different scenarios. Odd. The blonde started walking the path as he followed her to watch the familiar training grounds. Then they passed a field where people were practicing. That's it, my youthful students. Embrace your inner fire. Well done Neji, I see improvement in your speed. Shikamaru could have groaned. There was no more troublesome team than the one of Maida Guy. Tenten and Neji were alright, but Guy and Lee were too annoying to handle. It wasn't surprising that they were training together since the two younger males kept their rivalry concerning taijutsu up even though they weren't genins anymore, which was probably the reason they were sparring again. Hey, who? With a speed that Shikamaru normally only used during missions, he pressed his palm on Naruto's lower part of her face to keep her from talking. Even if Guy and Lee were currently shouting, Naruto could be loud enough to be heard, too, and the last thing he wanted now was the attention of those two lunatics. That's why he pulled the blonde girl towards him so her back was pressed against his chest. He lowered his mouth to reach her ear and whispered, "Be quiet, alright?" Her hair smelled slightly of strawberries, he noticed as he felt her face warm up. She nodded slightly, so he pulled his hand away again and allowed her to turn her face around. He beckoned his head and grabbed her wrist to steer her away from the training grounds. Once they were safe, he let her go. She watched him with big eyes, the bright blue unnerving him. He grew a little uneasy and seized into his pants pocket to play with the gem in it. Are you hungry? She should be. The day was slowly coming to an end and their last meal had been the breakfast they had at home. She smiled and Shikamaru relaxed as her expressions became familiar again. Can I choose? I guess. After all, I am a gentleman, he answered wryly when remembering his mother's words from yesterday. She laughed loudly. Did you really insist on buying the flowers personally? He shrugged, grin never fading. Insist is a strong word. They ended up in a place called Ramen Ichiraku. Shikamaru didn't know it very well apart from the fact that they apparently made the best ramen in Konoha, which was what Naruto insisted on eating. Hey, Shikamaru? He turned to face the blonde who was slurping her noodles down. Who are the guys on the rocks? He raised his brows. It's the Hokage monument. The faces are those of the Hokages. The one on the left is the Shodame, next to him is the Nidame, Sandame, Yondaime, and at the very right is the Godame. Her eyes widened and fixated him. Can we go there? You mean on top of it? She nodded vigorously. He stood up, stretched himself and paid the bill. Then hurry up. That's how they eventually ended up on the monument. It had been a good idea, after all, he thought, as he finally laid down to watch the vanishing clouds. Naruto sat next to him, looking odd in front of the scenery that she was faced with. Shikamaru could understand her reaction, as you could see the whole village from this spot that was currently wrapped in orange light that shone from the sinking sun. And, he inquired, what's better? Konoha or Uzu? She snorted. Is that a joke? Rolling her eyes, she tore her gaze from the scenery to face him. Konoha, of course. He raised his brows. You never were in Uzu, were you? She didn't let him answer. Of course, you weren't. I would have seen you, because Uzu is just so damn small. She sighed exasperatedly. Do you know anything about it? He shook his head. Not really. Which isn't really surprising. Her tone sounded slightly bitter. She scrunched up her brows. The old people in Uzu sometimes tell how it used to be such a cool ninja village and everything, but now. She exhaled, preparing for a story. Things apparently went downhill in the ninja war. Many other countries were scared of the Uzumaki clan, those who basically run the village. She shrugged, turning away from him. I think because of the clan's traits and the Fuinjutsu, you know? We were good at it. But the others weren't. They still aren't. That's why they're scared. It was the first time Shikamaru could spot anger, no, fury in her face. We, the clan, weren't many to begin with, and after they were killed, it didn't take long to rough the whole village up. She lay down next to him, eyes fixed on the darkening sky. After that, the village never really recovered. There are no ninjas or anything, just a couple of people living together, I guess. Shikamaru was interested. They had never learned anything about Uzushigakure at the academy and he had been too lazy to look something up in the library. A question formed in his head. Isn't that dangerous? When there are no ninjas, there is no one who protects the village. Is Uzu prosperous enough to pay for the service from ninjas of foreign countries? She snorted. Prosperous? Not near that. The people are mostly farmers and fishers, they have enough to live, but not much more. She seemed to sadden while speaking those words. We get protection through Konoha nins. Shikamaru was surprised. Konoha? She nodded, still not looking at him. Yes. Apparently, Konoha and Uzu always had a friendly relationship, especially at the past. And, he noticed a blush riding up her face as she embarrassedly scratched her head and sent him an unusually shy look. I am not the first Uzumaki girl to come here and, she shrugged, and, you know, marry. He understood a little better now. Maybe the villages had close ties because women of the one influential clan in Uzu were married to prestigious shinobi in Konoha. But something was missing in the equation. It was an enormous expenditure to assign ninjas the long-term mission to protect a village that doesn't even belong to the Land of Fire. However, he was hesitative of asking Naruto. He didn't quite trust her and he knew that she didn't trust him, neither. She wouldn't just spill every secret she has just because he asked nicely. Bottom line, she said after a longer silence, Uzu is now more of a rundown place with nothing really happening there. The 2 years I got away to travel were the best of my life. Not because I hate my home, it's just, she turned to look him in the eyes, holding his gaze, the people there. They are existing, not really living. No dreams, no aspirations, it make me crazy. Do you know what I mean? She didn't wait for an answer. But when I got out of there, I lived. I want to live, Shikamaru. There was a tint of desperation in her voice. But they won't let me out of there. Never. Only that one time with Jiraiya-sensei, and even then he kept a close eye on me, supervising me. Finally, realization hit him. That's why you came here without making a fuss. The alternative was staying there forever. She grinned apologetically. Oh, I made a fuss, especially when I was younger. It's not like they kept this whole. She gestured clumsily with her hands, arrangement a secret. I planned on walking away of Uzu. I even tried it a couple of times. But even after I started training, she scrunched up her brows. Shikamaru predicted the content of the next words. Those ninjas weren't only there to protect Uzu, but also to make sure that you didn't escape, right? She nodded. And they were strong bastards. And smart. Never lasted long till they found me. The uneasiness in Shikamaru grew. Something didn't add up. Why go such measures to prevent her from escaping? What made her so special to Konoha? Even if she was so strong, her strength couldn't be too overpowering, since she never managed to even get out of that village for a long time. The one thing that differentiated her from many others were probably her fuinjutsu skills. He didn't know how progressed she was in that area, but Naruto's words had suggested that her clan had a natural talent with it. Surely it made her desirable, as seal masters were extremely rare, but so desirable enough to make such a fuss? Something didn't quite add up, but he leaved it be for now. He moved his hand to play with the gem in his pocket. And now? He asked carefully. Now I want to become a kunoichi. Then I have the possibility to get out, to get to choose between many possibilities. Not only for missions. I was promised that I wouldn't get guarded anymore if I kept my part of the deal. And they kept it, already. The moment I passed these gates, no one was following me around, anymore. Shikamaru asked himself whether they would let her go off the leash so easily. Logically, they shouldn't, since there was no guarantee that Naruto would keep on fulfilling her part of the deal. The moment she was assigned a mission as a shinobi, she could decide to sneak off and never return again. Granted, that would make her to a Nukenin, but maybe she would consider her ultimate liberty worth that price. He groaned. So complicated. You couldn't just be average, could you? She watched him confusedly. All I wanted was a mediocre wife with average skills, average personality, and even average looks. You think I'm ugly? She shouted indignantly. No, he huffed. You didn't even have the decency to be that. You had to be beautiful, hadn't you? And she was beautiful, he realized. Even more so with the blush in her face that was getting redder as moments passed by, till she broke his gaze to watch the almost completely vanished sun. He turned his eyes into the same direction. Sometimes I think God's playing a little game with me, he sighed. That he sent you to mock me. To give me a lesson that I'm not as clever as I thought. She didn't make a motion. You're so weird, I don't get it. He stretched himself and tiredly stood up. Come on, it's late. We should get home. He stretched his arm out, hand inviting her to help her to stand up. She grasped it. When they returned that evening to the Nara estate, Naruto was exceptionally quiet. It wasn't uncomfortable, though, as, for Shikamaru, Naruto wasn't that much of a stranger anymore. Their relationship had developed to a point where he didn't feel the need to avoid an awkward silence. Back at home, his father was sitting on the floor of the living room, watching his shogi board pensively. Hey, greeted Shikamaru. His father turned to look at them, a friendly smile spreading on his face. Welcome, how was your day? At that, Naruto seemed to gain her usual energy back. Great, Konoha is amazing, I'm happy to hear that. He motioned on the other side of the board. Do you know how to play shogi, Naruto-chan? The chan had been added, since Naruto had refused a san, claiming it was too formal and set a too heavy atmosphere for someone like her. Shikamaru had yet to call her with that honorific, as he felt uncomfortable using it. That would sound like she is his girlfriend or something. Granted, she was his fiancée already, which destroyed the basis of his argumentation, but he conveniently skipped that part. No, I never tried, because it looked like it needed a lot of patience. I'm not very good at that. Shikaku laughed. I'll explain the rules then. She made a face at that. I'm not very good at comprehending and applying them. Of course, she was someone who learned in a more practical way and needed hands-on experience. I'll show you. She turned to look at him with her big eyes. It's against my father. She smiled. He conveniently skipped the part he referred to Naruto and him as us. Playing together with Naruto was oddly fun, which was unusual in itself, as shogi often was entertaining but never really funny. However, the strategies, if they could be called that she proposed once she understood how the game worked were almost comical. Naruto hadn't been exaggerating when she stated that she didn't have the patience to play shogi, as she made 2 brash decisions. Her moves were hasty and risky. It didn't take long for her to want to start sacrificing most of the players they had just because she was getting bored of the status quo on the board. As a result, they lost every time, but he still felt oddly satisfied when he looked at how she scratched the back of her head at having lost again. He felt a gentle hand on his shoulder that made him open his eyes. "Hey Shikamaru, are you sure you want to come with me? I really memorized the way to the tower." Naruto's voice sounded even scratchier than usual, he noted hazily. It couldn't be too long since she woke up herself. Shikamaru. He was dozing off again. It was early and he was very tempted to simply stay in bed and keep on sleeping, but he had been the one to suggest accompanying her in the first place. Yesterday evening, in between the many shogi games, his father had told Naruto that the Hokage would be expecting her today at 7 a.m. As he had been curious about what the Godem would talk about with the girl, he had wanted to go with her under the pretense of making sure she didn't get lost in Konoha. Although Naruto assured him that she could find the tower on her own, she couldn't be too adamant about that, since it didn't take long for him to convince her. Now she gave him a way out again, and he was tempted to grasp this chance, but damn, his curiosity was nagging at the back of his mind. He wouldn't have a restful sleep anyway. "I'll come." He felt the compelling need to close his eyes. 5 minutes, he slurred quietly. There was giggle. He opened one eye. "What is it?" She approached even further and sat on the side of the bed which he wasn't occupying and shrugged. "What?" he inquired, but she only shrugged and giggled again. "It's nothing, really." Shikamaru rolled his eyes. "Just say it, so that I can enjoy the next 5 minutes dozing, instead of pondering what you meant," he mumbled grumpily while snuggling into his pillow. The smile never faded from her face. "You're cute when you're sleepy." The next 5 minutes were spent wide awake. When Naruto exited the room to let him change into his clothes, he trusted her not to tell his mother about this effective way of getting him out of bed. When they had arrived at the Hokage Tower, they were forced to wait 10 minutes before they could finally enter her office. Of course, Tsunade could decide that whatever she wanted to talk about with Naruto was private and thus, send him on the floor to wait. That would mean that waking up earlier had been for naught, but he was willing to take that risk. When they eventually entered her office, Tsunade lifted her head only for a surprised look to take over her face. "Naruto-chan." Her smile was oddly soft. "Tsunade." The happiness over seeing a familiar face in Konoha was apparent in the girl's greeting. "Wow, all that paperwork is not set up? You're actually working? Is this real?" Her inquiring was shockingly rude and Shikamaru had never heard talking anyone that way with the Hokage. Naruto Uzumaki's surly was surprising, but he began to think that she had a death wish as well. But the older woman only sighed exasperatedly. "What about your boobs? Are they real? What kind of dumb question is that?" The Godem seemed to suppress a chuckle, but her amusement was obvious. "Well, the last time we met, how old were you? 12? 13? I wasn't working and, those two," she pointed in Naruto's general direction, which Shikamaru refused to inspect, were nowhere to be seen. "I guess things change, huh?" While Naruto embarrassedly tried to retort, Tsunade started to laugh like she was having the time of her life. "Ah, teenagers, so easy to rile up." At that moment she briefly glanced over to him. Shikamaru had no doubt that she blatantly saw through his stoic facade. Then, she mercifully changed the topic from his fiancée's body to his presence. "Playing guide, Shikamaru?" Before he could open his mouth to attempt to answer, Naruto was already talking. She seemed to have recovered from her earlier state of stuttering quite quickly. "Nah, that was yesterday, Tsunade. Today, Shikamaru wanted to make sure I don't get lost, although I totally memorized everything by now." The Hokage lifted one perfect brow. "Is that so?" Her tone was heavily laced with sarcasm. "My, Shikamaru, helping ladies in need? What a gentleman." This time, Shikamaru grinned. As always, Tsunade rolled her eyes. "Whatever. Just sit down, you brats." She tiredly sagged into her seat and stretched herself. "And, how's everything going?" Naruto shrugged. "Great. Konoha is cool. and really big. Normally it seemed that it was a hard feat for her to sit still, but it was apparent that it was an even bigger effort now. She jiggled her feet up and down, crossed and uncrossed them, laced her hands together, only to fix a strain of her hair in the next moment. Her gaze was expectant, as if asking, "What now?" "Next week," Tsunade said after a longer silence, getting straight to the point. "What, next week?" Naruto inquired. "You know how people officially become ninjas, right? Normally, when they want to become shinobi, they first visit the academy. After graduating, they will be put into teams that will be tested by jonins who eventually determine whether the graduates get to become genins." Tsunade eyed the other blonde critically from her feet till her head. "Obviously, I won't put you into a class with some children. That would be a waste of time. So I'll assign you to a jonin sensei who will determine whether you get to become a Konoha shinobi." Naruto's features became focused. The smile that was adorning her face only moments ago had vanished. "Will I be tested in a team or singly?" Tsunade shrugged. "Both is possible, but that will probably be deterred by the jonin running the test." Shikamaru chose that moment to interrupt. "And have you already chosen the one who will be testing her?" If she said a name, it wouldn't be much of a help for Naruto, but it was highly possible that Shikamaru knew something about the person. Maybe he could give her some instructions for her test. The Hokage narrowed her eyes. "I have someone in mind. But I'll have to speak with him about it first. Anyway, I'll inform you about the exact time and place later on." When Shikamaru and Naruto finally returned home, he could recognize an annoyingly familiar voice. Previous thoughts of going back to sleep having been given up upon, he paused in his tracks to inhale deeply. The blonde girl stopped a little after that and blinked at him confusedly. He shook his head. "Nothing. Brace yourself." Her addled expression not fading, she resumed to walking with Shikamaru following her closely. And, of course, he had to be right, because that annoyingly high voice could only belong to Ino Yamanaka. Said girl sprang up as soon as she spotted them and started tapping her foot up and down in a universal gesture of impatience and irritation. "I can't believe you lied to me, Shikamaru," were her first words. "Next week. You said next week on Tuesday." Quote, bored and annoyed, because he didn't get nearly enough sleep to deal with his former teammate, he answered. "I didn't say anything. I only asked you whether you knew who was on patrol at that day." Ino seemed to become even angrier at that. "It is the same. You did that on purpose to give of the impression that she would arrive at a later date than she actually did." He merely rolled his eyes. "Of course, I did that. Can't believe you fell for it, though. Not as observant as you'd like to be." The girl opened her mouth to give a probably very loud retort on his comment, only to be beat by the other girl who he had almost forgot was standing next to him. "Hey, I'm Naruto." Ino confusedly closed her mouth to look at his fiancé. "I'm Ino," she retorted, curiously mustering the other blonde girl up and down. "Shikamaru and I used to be teammates while we were genins." Naruto's familiar toothy smile spread over her face. "Really? Tell me some gossip over breakfast." During breakfast that Shikamaru and Naruto only had now, as they didn't eat anything before leaving the house earlier, Ino was invited. Luckily, the girl ignored him for the most part for the sake of giving the other blonde all the information she had on him. "I'm telling you, Naruto-chan," she voiced after swallowing a piece of egg, "your fiancé is just about the laziest guy in Konoha." Naruto's eyes grew big. "What, really?" Ino opened her mouth confusedly. "Don't tell me you haven't noticed? Please, Naruto," she pointed at his direction, "look at this guy. Even the way he's sitting and eating is lazy." Naruto mustered him as if searching for the features Ino had described. Her stare made him slightly uneasy and he casually dropped his hand to search for the gem in his pants pocket. "I don't know," she finally retorted. "I mean, I'm not here since a long time and of course you should know him better, but Shikamaru seemed—" She paused to search for the right word. "Attentive, helpful and, even dedicated." Shikamaru played with the moss agate while ignoring the uncomfortable feeling of being talked about while being in the same room. "Either," Ino began, one brow raised, "you, Naruto, are just an incredible airhead, or—" her gaze wandered to him. "You have spoken some magic spell that makes Shikamaru do crazy things." It was then, when he realized that he was indeed acting vastly different from how he usually would. Naruto didn't arrive long ago, but he had already spent more time with her than without her in that period, sleep included. "I'll go wash my hands." He needed to get away. Slowly, he walked out of the dining room and washed his hands in the bathroom as lazily as possible in the hopes of the girls being finished with their conversation by the time he was back. But when he approached the dining area again, he was disappointed. Ino was still talking. Really intelligent. Yeah, I didn't used to know much about him, but the one thing I was told was that he was smart. His father's is also like that, I noticed. Naruto. That's classically Nara. These guys are almost notorious for their intelligence. That bastard could always set up the best strategies while on missions. Shikamaru resumed to waiting on the floor, refusing to enter the room. He'd rather wait for this talk to end. But you know what? Ino's voice took a softer tint. Those strategies he forms have the goal to reach the maximal satisfaction rate. Not for him, but for all. He wouldn't show it, but he is selfless and caring like that. Before Naruto could retort, he deliberately made much noise to alert them of his presence. Then, as if not having heard their exchange, he nonchalantly sat on his chair. So Naruto-chan, Ino changed the topic effortlessly. You have to meet the others, too. Others? The blonde girl inquired. Yeah, the rest of Team 10, for starters. Although, we technically aren't a team anymore, but we still meet regularly for barbecue. They'll be excited to see you. A happy smile spread over her face and she turned to him. Shikamaru? Momentarily, he was confused. It was almost as if she was asking for his permission. Yeah, of course. Her smile grew wider and bemused him even further. While Ino and Naruto kept on talking and making plans, he tried to understand her behavior, but no amount of analyzing gave him an answer. It was absurd. Why would she ask him? He wasn't one to give orders, and she wasn't one to accept them. Oh, it's gotten late, the ash-blonde girl exclaimed. I promised my mother to take over the shop. I have to go. For the sake of being polite, Shikamaru accompanied the girls to the gates of the compound. Naruto-chan. It was his mother who was screaming at the top of her lungs from the garden. Come, I want to show you something. Yes, I'm coming, Naruto shouted back, only to turn around and smile one last time at Ino. It was great talking with you, we'll see each other next week. She ran off quickly in the direction of Yoshino while Shikamaru resumed to walking with his former teammate to the gates. So, Ino began, quite a catch you've got there. That doesn't mean you have to try to set me up with her, he retorted when remembering what she had told Naruto when they thought he wasn't listening. She only raised a brow. So you eavesdropped, huh? What are you grumpy about? I wanted her to have a good impression of you. It doesn't matter. He paused. They had reached the gates. You and my mother don't have to play matchmaker. We are already engaged. That makes this whole endeavor pointless. She bristled and put her hands to her hips. We were only trying to help, you know? Your mother and me could fill endless conversations about your negative habits, but we go through the effort about making you seem as appealing as possible. He kept his nonchalant attitude. Why does it matter? It's unimportant whether she likes me or not. The marriage will happen regardless of how we feel about each other. Ino's apparent irritation grew into anger laced with pity. The more she likes you, the better your whole relationship will work out. We are only thinking of your happiness, Shikamaru, but, she ran a hand through her hair. You can be a real prick. I'm genuinely starting to feel sorry for Naruto-chan. You better talk with her. About what? She lowered her voice, glancing over to Naruto's direction. Do you remember when you both returned this morning and I started ranting at you? He rolled his eyes. What does that matter? She ignored his retort and resumed to talking unperturbedly. Then she suddenly butted into the conversation by introducing herself. He couldn't see what her point was. She did that to take attention off you, to push you out of the line of the fire. He scrunched up his brows. You're being ridiculous. There was no fire to speak of. You're as always, exaggerating, Ino. But instead of bristling, she shrugged and grinned. Well, there are things that only a woman can see, I guess. He rolled his eyes again. Alright, tell me, why would she do that? She shrugged again. Why don't you ask her? Then, she turned to look in the direction of the main street. I've got to go. My mom will kill me. A week passed and everyone fell into a routine. Naruto dissolved her presence of being someone akin to a guest to someone who was part of the Nara household. Every morning, his mother would send Naruto to wake him up, as the girl never slept in as long as he did. She never said that he was cute again, though, for which he was grateful. Then they'd have breakfast, when his mother luckily didn't bug him as much as she used to, as she was busy chattering with Naruto. After that, he lazed around. He knew that Tsunade gave him a break with the missions since she wanted him and his fiancée to get used to their new situation. Meanwhile, the blonde girl started working on her seals and went out to explore Konoha further. Sometimes he accompanied her, sometimes he didn't. He quickly found out that she needed no babysitting and didn't require someone to show her around the whole day. Shikamaru caught himself thinking that if their marriage would be similar to their current situation, he could probably bear with it. This whole thing turned out to be not nearly as troublesome as he'd predicted it to be. One evening, Naruto didn't return when her usual time came around. Concerned, his mother watched the clock. Maybe, she didn't notice how time has passed. That's likely, his father retorted. She seems to be tuning everything else out when she is working with the seals. Shikamaru rolled his eyes. It's not like her to be focused. Shikaku's gaze narrowed on him. Do you know why seal masters are so rare, Shikamaru? The Nara heir shrugged. Fuinjutsu is difficult. No one wants to go through the trouble. His father nodded. The most people who work with seals are only copying them. And even that is hard. Shikamaru raised his brows. Copying is hard? One false ink brush could have fatal outcomes. The fear of possible mistakes, which is legitimate, as they very often happen, scares many shinobi away from dealing with Fuinjutsu. Naruto, however, he turned his head to watch the ceiling. Well, I haven't seen it myself, of course, but she is supposed to have surpassed copying long ago. Apparently she is already creating her own ones. Shikamaru sighed and stretched himself. That's why she is working in the woods. She doesn't need the space, but it is dangerous. His father nodded affirmingly. Does that mean she could be hurt as we're speaking? His mother seemed panicked. She turned to him. Shikamaru, go search for her. Hopefully, she just forgot about time. He stretched himself again and stood up in order to exit the house. As he was on his way to the forest, questions emerged in his head. His father had been unusually informative earlier. The only time he had said something about Naruto was when Shikamaru was 12 and cornered him after the genin exams. This time, he didn't even ask Shikaku for any kind of information, which made the whole ordeal only more suspicious. What was the goal behind his speech? What was it supposed to affect? Shikamaru knew that his father didn't talk for the sake of it and therefore suspected a plan behind their earlier conversation. It is likely that the Nara head wanted to influence his son through what information he provided. Shikamaru went through all of the questions he had concerning Naruto that his father could have wanted to influence. The information concerning Naruto's skills as a sealer were mostly relevant concerning the question why the council desperately wants her in Konoha. It was logical that with not many Fuinjutsu users existing, someone exceptionally talented would be highly desirable. The only problem was that his father would not have told him this fact just like that. Which meant that there was something to hide that he wanted to steer Shikamaru's attention away from. It dawned on him that the Nara head only revealed a little part of the truth in order to satisfy his son's curiosity and thus, hide something which was of much greater importance. Something was not right about this matter, but before he could think further about it, he finally spotted Naruto. She was lying on her stomach scribbling pensively, not even noticing his approach. Not wanting her to make a mistake with the seal she was working on, he advanced from behind. Slowly, he lowered his body to the ground so that each knee was resting on the sides of her waist. Then, he stealthily bended over her, and when she paused in her brushing, she quickly moved to grasp her wrists with both hands. He could feel her tensing up and he knew that she was preparing for an attack. Calm down. It's only me, Shikamaru? Her voice was oddly high. What are you doing? She seemed upset. You didn't return, so I came to look whether you're still alive. For a moment, Naruto paused as if only realizing how much had passed, then, she seemed to remember something else. So why did you sneak up on me like that? I didn't want you to make a mistake. You didn't notice me approaching, so I thought that startling you could make your hand slip. She pulled her hands out of his grasp and rolled over to lay on her back so that they could see each other's faces now. Her red face was splattered with little blotches of ink. He grinned. You look like a kid after a painting session. There was still a blush on her face, but she grumbled slightly. Hey Shikamaru? I guess I could crawl out, but it would be much easier to stand up if you'd get off me. It was then that Shikamaru truly realized in what position they were. Previously, he only let his ninja instincts work and only thought of an efficient way to alert her of his presence without causing any trouble. But now, he recognized that he was actually leaning over her. Each of his knees were spread to rest on the sides of her body, and although his back was straight now, they were still in a compromising position. Embarrassed, he hurried to stand up slightly stiffly. Right, sorry. It was some days after that, when Naruto returned to his room to wake him up. It was past noon, but he had been on a mission the day earlier and only returned very late. Shikamaru. Her voice was only a whisper, as if she wanted to wake but not disturb him. He opened his eyes to see her sitting on the side of the bed with one of her flowery dresses on. Are you sure you're coming? I know you're exhausted from yesterday. It was the day they were supposed to meet for a barbecue to introduce Naruto to the rest of Team 10. He nodded sleepily into his pillow, hardly keeping his eyes open. She smiled faintly and he closed his eyes. Suddenly, he felt additional pressure weighing the bed down. He opened his eyes again only to be confronted with Naruto's face directly staring at his. She was laying on her side, mirroring his position. He was sure that if they lay any nearer to each other, they could have been able to feel the breath of the other. Are you sure? Her voice was still a merciful whisper that didn't grate on his nerves, and he found himself slowly dozing off again. After the short bewilderment of finding her in his bed, he was slowly getting used to her presence. Your hair smells like strawberries. He didn't know why he said that aloud. One moment he was distantly taking in the scent, but for some reason his brain mouth filter didn't seem to work yet. Is it strong? He shrugged slightly. Not really, but it still could be dangerous on missions. He could hear the smile in her voice. Subtle is not my forte. It made Shikamaru open his eyes a crack to stare into her face. There are people out there waiting to eat little blonde-haired, strawberry-scented girls like you. It made Shikamaru want to point out that she shouldn't be too incautious because he suspected that she was still too naive to grasp the danger that comes with the job of being a ninja. But her smile only widened. Ah, are you concerned? You can be so sweet. He tried to avoid her eyes while his hands itched to play with the gem that he was used to find in his pants pocket. That won't work again. She made an honestly surprised face. What? Saying those things to get me out of bed? Her smile took a teasing tint. I'm not saying that to get you out of bed. I mean it. Shikamaru did his best to ignore her, but Naruto Uzumaki wasn't one to be ignored. Are you one of those guys who don't like being called cute? I don't mean it belittling, you know? But I'll admit that you're handsome, too, if that makes you feel better. Her laughter rang in his ears. He didn't stay in bed for much longer after that. When they arrived at the barbecue place, he could already spot the others sitting at the table, although it wasn't one with 4 seats as usual. He recognized that Ino sat at the window with Choji next to her. At his side was Asuma-sensei, which only left Shikamaru and Naruto to sit at one bench next to each other. He was 100% sure that Ino was responsible for that. He steered towards them with Naruto walking beside him. She wasn't one to hide behind others. Naru-chan. It was Ino who distinguished them first. The others turned curiously to stare in their direction. Hey, Ino-chan. The blonde looked visibly happy. When they arrived at the table, he let Naruto slide in first only to follow her after that. Sagging into his seat, he put his arms on top of the backrest. Guys, that's Naruto. Naruto, those are Choji and Asuma-sensei. You already know Ino. After that he relaxingly leaned back and let his fiancée do the talk while observing everyone. He didn't feel nervous about introducing her to anyone, as she was far better than him in making small talk and making others like her. Shikamaru thought that he could get used to letting her take over the show to let him observe from the sidelines. So, Asuma-sensei began. I'd like to say that Shikamaru told us much about you, but he didn't know anything to tell about. Naruto's face morphed into her trademark foxy grin. Oh, I'm sure he knew more than he talked about. The eyes turned to muster him, but he only shrugged. The light conversations went on while they ate only to be interrupted by the girls going to the restroom together. The men fell into a comfortable silence, as soon as Ino and Naruto had left. Asuma-sensei wiggled his eyebrows while grinning smugly in his direction. Seems you had quite a lucky streak there, Shikamaru. He didn't comment, only staring wryly at his teacher while Choji chuckled softly. The man's grin turned into a smile. You shouldn't let the lady get away. The likes of her aren't easy to find. Shikamaru felt the need to remark that the man was hardly in a position to talk about relationships, as he didn't even have a stable one himself. Furthermore, it really didn't matter what he did, the lady couldn't get away, anyway. Instead he shrugged and confirmed with a quiet, yeah, I know. Because he really did know. Naruto had succeeded all his expectations and he probably couldn't have found a better wife if he tried. Instead of getting the average girl he hoped for, Naruto turned out to be anything but that. She was interesting, friendly, independent and didn't get on his nerves. Objectively seen, you could really call that a lucky streak. Still he asked himself why he didn't feel bothered by her energy, restlessness, ambition and optimism. The fact that he got along with her, although they had not much in common, made him question whether he knew himself as good as he thought he did. It was already late when they decided to head home. Everyone had stayed for much longer than they normally would, probably because it was easy to lose sense of time when Naruto was being entertaining. The stars were clear that night as he walked beside the blonde girl while she was peacefully humming a song he didn't know. She seemed happy. Naruto? It was the best moment to ask this and it had been nagging on him since he spoke with Ino. Last week, when you met Ino for the first time, and she started ranting, do you remember? She looked up, her blue eyes wide with attention and nodded. You interrupted her suddenly. Did you? He broke himself off, pondering how to word his suspicions. Speaking his thoughts out loud seemed awkward. Did you do that to take the attention of me? To push me out of the line of fire? He hoped that using Ino's expressions would get the message across. Naruto's hum died down as she shrugged non-committingly. Her demeanor was unusually shy. Did you? He questioned stubbornly. I felt bad that you had to lie to her because of me. Guilt laced her voice. He halted only for her to stop not long after. You didn't make me do anything. It was my own decision. Her face was doubtful, the face of someone who thought the other was lying for the sake of comforting another. Shikamaru was angry. You're stupid. Here you are, forced into marrying a total stranger you can't help but worry about. Save your pity for yourself. Her features morphed into a harder expression. I may not have your analytical mind, Shikamaru, but I'm conscious enough to realize that I'm responsible for the situation we're in. He raised an eyebrow, prompting her to continue. You and I, don't know much about this whole arrangement, but I'm sure we have both realized something. She wildly gestured around and Shikamaru was glad that they were in a more abandoned part of town since the volume she was talking in rose gradually. This marriage was only arranged so that I would come to Konoha. You are being used for that mean. If it wasn't for me, you wouldn't be stuck in a marriage. Just like in that shogi game of yours, you're being sacrificed as a pawn by the player of the game. Shut up. She startled as his voice was harsher than it intended it to be, but he felt the need to clear this situation up. Did you see it? The contract? I did, and at the end there are the signatures that dictated this arrangement, the Sandame's and my father's. They, and the council they represent are the ones responsible. So get those dumb thoughts out of your blonde head, or is your hair color getting to you? Naruto stayed silent, but her eyes were wide and glassy with gratitude. She seemed so little and frail at that moment, that it was hard to recognize her from the energetic and optimistic persona she usually showed. He put a hand on her shoulder to push her softly forward. Besides, his voice took a playful tint to disperse the heavy atmosphere. I don't need help from a girl. I'm supposed to be your husband, no? So just let me handle things. Her laugh extinguished what little was left of the oppressive mood. Hey, you're not my husband, yet. And I can handle myself just well. He chuckled. Sure you can.